3 years ago, I landed a UX job at Zalando. It was one of my first attempts doing interviews in English. And it was definitely the first ever time I've gone through the whole interview process as we know it right now, meaning portfolio deep dive, whiteboard challenge, and culture fit interviews. And I did not know what to expect from this process really at that time. So in this series of 3 consequent videos, I will explain to you how I did it, what to expect, and what is my take on the hiring process now after working at Zalando for 3 years and being an interviewer myself. My name is Ines, my channel is about UX design. Let's go. So first, about my background. I have overall 15 years of experience in UX design. And yes, for most of you, it's quite a lot, and you cannot relate to this level of experience. But as I said in the beginning, I had my own limitations that complicated the hiring process for me at that time. So first of all, I had a very little experience in doing job interviews in English. And frankly, at that time, my English was around B2 level. So it was not that high, and I could not express myself freely on a topic. Then I've never really done this classical hiring process before, when you have a portfolio deep dive, whiteboard challenge, and then a culture fit interview. The reason for that is that in my native country, we don't really have such a long hiring process. We only do 1 or 2 interviews and then you are done. And also the local market in my native country is really small and everybody knows each other, so it's much easier to find a job using your connections and not doing interviews at all. So interviewing for Zalando for me was quite a challenge. But despite all of that, I did quite well because I was able to prove my experience and land a job as a principal product designer right away, which is a pretty high level for UX designers. And now when I'm completely adjusted to this role, I'm interviewing candidates for Zalando myself. So I see a lot of people at the same place where I have been, not knowing what to expect, not knowing what are the criteria. And this is what I want to fix in this video. One more thing about the interview process for me. I did all interviews in 1 day. This is because I was hired during the pandemic and companies wanted to hire more candidates faster. My interview started at 10 a.m. and was over after lunch, but I still had the same interview steps that we have before at Zalando, so the process never changed. It's just I did it in 1 go. It was also really intense and I'm happy we are not doing this anymore, but it helped me to warm up my English and maybe this is the reason I made it eventually. So having all of the interview steps in 1 day is quite atypical now, but you can still encounter that and the principles of preparing to this interview process will not change. So how I did it. The first step for me was, of course, a screening interview with a recruiter. At that time, Zalando hired an external recruiting agency, and this agency reached out to me directly through my LinkedIn. I was actually hoping that will be the case. I was really active on LinkedIn, and I was attracting recruiters at that time. So it was not a coincidence, and maybe in one of my next videos, I will explain to you what this strategy was about. Let me know in the comments if this is something interesting for you. But anyways, this recruiter reached out to me, we scheduled a call, all went as usual. And actually, I did not like this call. At first, I thought that we cannot get along with this company. It felt too corporate. I had a feeling that the recruiter is not interested in me at all. Or probably that they were disappointed by meeting me, I don't know. Now I know that you can't always judge how the company will turn out to be by the interaction with the recruiter. And also, when it is an external agency, the quality of the people working there might vary. And this was a case for me. I was very much satisfied with all the next interviews that I had, but not with this one. So this recruiter was really laid back. He was sitting on a balcony or somewhere. He was like counting the time until the interview is over, this kind of stuff. And he asked all the basic questions like he was reading them from the list. First, he introduced himself and explained about the role, about the company. Then he asked me to do the introduction, which of course I rehearsed before and I did it. Then he segued in explaining to me how the interview will be structured and how it will be all placed in 1 day. Next, he only asked me 1 question and I believe he was kind of checking my values. The question was, how would I describe an egoless design? I was caught off guard with this question because, as I said, my English was not so high at that time and I could not express myself really well spontaneously. And I was also discouraged with this laid-back approach of the guy, so my answer was quite vague. I answered something like, a designer should understand that they are working in the team, that someone else can pick up the job that they are doing right now, and that they should not mix design with art. So it was genuinely my answer. objectively it was not really well formulated, but somehow I passed this initial check and I was invited to the hiring days. In between the screening interviews and the hiring days, there was a month. And I used this month to prepare intensively, especially with my English. Because in between I have also did the research about the company. I was really excited that this might be something really interesting. Despite the corporate and formal interaction with this recruiter, I thought, yeah, I might give it a go. Now, on the exact day, I think it was somewhere in April 2021, we started with a portfolio deep dive. And the expectations were that I will prepare 2 projects that will emphasize and highlight what are my strengths and what I'm interested into working with. I was also asked not doing a walkthrough through my portfolio. By the way, on this channel, I have a video about how my portfolio looked like at that time. I recommend you to watch it to understand the picture. We did not have FigJam at that time, so I was using just a simple Figma file where I placed all the designs and all the artifacts I could retrieve in one consequence. I have also found and prepared some of the initial documents we had, some project briefs, Miro boards and stuff like that. And the idea was that during my presentation, I will share the whole screen, and when I needed or asked to dive deeper, I would open one of those documents. And I must say, this is really the best practice. Now, when I'm interviewing other UX designers, I could clearly see that some of them interpret the portfolio deep dive just as a portfolio walkthrough. They do not prepare anything additional to that. And that actually limits the story that they can tell about themselves and limits the interviewer in the questions that they need to ask. Because it's really important we understand the impact UX designers make and how they structure the process. And when you retrieve additional artifacts, when you switch between Figma and Miro boards, for example, this makes your presentation more interesting to follow and more clear for the listeners. And this interview went really well for me because I spent a lot of time preparing it. I really rehearsed that multiple times because I was not confident in my English skills. But the good thing is that this part you control. And also the interviewer that I had at that time, she was really friendly. She set me up to success. She was asking questions in a really interested manner. And I felt that we had a connection. And I am really grateful to her for that because I could really relax and I could set myself to the mood that this is all the game, that I'm also interviewing the company the same way they are interviewing me. Speaking right now from my interview experience, I could definitely recommend you investing a lot in preparing to this interview part. Think through what is your story, what do you want to highlight, what shall I be impressed by, how can I as a hiring manager or interviewer understand what you are interested in doing next in your job, and especially highlight how did you change the product development process when you spot that something did not work. And this is, in my opinion, the most crucial part of this whole interview process. This is why we want to do this. This is why we do deep dives. Because technically we can see everything, we can read the story in your portfolio. But still, we are doing this because we want to understand how proactive you were. Let me give you an example. Sometimes designers, especially if they were working in agencies, they take this reactive approach and they do everything the client suggests. And this is quite a normal situation in agencies or even in freelancing because they pay you by hours to do what they want. So you have a correction, you correct it, you send it for review, you have a correction, and this is your cycle. But in tech companies, we really value proactiveness. We are all in the same boat. Nobody is higher than other. And if a PM comes to you asking to do some corrections, you are allowed and actually encouraged to take this critically. And if you spot that something does not work in the product development process, you should voice your opinion. You should suggest how can we improve that. And this is what you especially need to highlight in your portfolio deep dive session. Now, in my case, for example, one of the projects that I made was a launch of the MVP. And during the launch, our stakeholders were convinced that we can just cook it up with like basic unbranded design system. But I insisted that we need to put branding into it, to make our MVP more relatable, to make it more crisp and finished, because otherwise our users will not trust the data that we provide. And I have explained in details how I did it, how I scheduled my interaction with stakeholders, how I prepared concept designs to convince them that this will look good, how I quantified the efforts needed for launching the unbranded design system and branding that in the second iteration versus launching it with the branded iteration right away. And that overall convinced stakeholders to make a change in the plans. And this is it. This is what we're interested in as interviewers and hiring managers. Because eventually we want to hire designers who will be pointing out on things that are not working and who will be advocating for users, but also finding the balance between business needs and user needs, of course. Overall, that was my best interview in the sequence. I also liked that the most, but of course I could control the narrative and I could prepare myself. I will tell you more about the next stages of my interview process, white ball challenge and the culture fit interviews on my next videos, because I want to really deep dive into the topic. And if you like this video and you don't want to miss the next videos, give me thumbs up and hit the subscribe button down below. I'll see you next time.